Before we proceed with our program tonight, we will now observe a brief moment of silence for the Ukrainian victims of the Russian invasion, and also for the 11 Israelis murdered by Arab terrorists just this week. Good evening. My name is David Bross, and I am a member of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Southern New Jersey and co-chair of the Israel Advocacy Committee. I'd like to welcome you all to this important program to discuss some of the most pressing issues facing Israel, the United States, and our own local Jewish community. The JCRC Israel Advocacy Committee helps to coordinate, educate, and organize efforts among the South Jersey pro-Israel community to educate and advocate on behalf of Israel and the U.S.-Israel relationship. We serve as a resource for individuals and organizations in our local community on the latest information, trends, issues, and advocacy opportunities in support of Israel. We host the Israel Education Forum, the Middle East Institute, and additional programs such as tonight's presentation in an effort to better inform the community of the most current and pressing issues of which we all need to hear concerning Israel and the Middle East. Our JCRC is also strongly committed to engaging in the battle against anti-Semitism in all of its forms and manifestations, and we maintain that there is no meaningful distinction between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. I encourage all of you to join us in any way you can in the work of our JCRC, and I look forward to greeting you again at our most important community events as we resume, finally, meeting live and in person. It is our hope that you will leave tonight's program with some critical, up-to-date facts and a sense of empowerment. Tonight's esteemed guest speaker is Dr. Eric Mandel, founder and director of MEPIN, that's M-E-P-I-N, the Middle East Political Information Network. MEPIN is a private Middle East research analysis read by members of Congress, their foreign policy advisors, members of the Knesset, journalists, think tanks, and organizational leaders. Dr. Mandel regularly briefs members of Congress and their staffs about the current geopolitical situation in the Middle East. He also meets with leading Israeli thinkers and has covered Israel's last 5 wars over the past 15 years. Dr. Mandel is a columnist for the Jerusalem Post, writing about the US-Israeli relationship. He also talks about Iran, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the war between the Sunnis and Shiites, and the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which we know as BDS. He is a frequent speaker and scholar in residence, including on university campuses, and he organizes yearly in-depth educational seminars in Israel. Dr. Mandel is the Northeast co-chair of Stand With Us, an international organization dedicated to educating the public about the Middle East and Israel. I encourage you all to check out the websites of both MEPIN and Stand With Us. We welcome your questions to Dr. Mandel following his presentation, which you may place in the Zoom chat box. There may be many questions, so if we don't get to yours tonight, I am sure that Dr. Mandel will be happy to answer you if you go onto his website and contact him by email. As my pal, Dr. Bob Benedon, likes to say, you're in for a treat tonight. So I am honored to welcome back to our community the one and only Dr. Eric Mandel.
Thank you very, very much, David. That was very kind of you. I know everybody, time-wise is tired. It's the end of a day, but hopefully I'll keep you on the edge of your seat for the next 45, 50 minutes. So let's get right to it. The first 2 slides I always show, let's see why I'm not moving on here. There we go. I really do this for a very simple reason. it really humbles me, and I think it takes my audience to understand what's going on. This is a diagram of the Middle East and the interrelationships. And what I try to tell people who look at this simplistically is it is so complex and ever-changing. This sketch diagram of all the interrelationships doesn't even count, if you look in the bottom right corner, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And the other part about being humbled here, in knowing this is a slide I've shown for many years, and I like to start with it, and then we'll get into the depth of what we're doing, is why we in the West don't really understand another region. It's very, very different than ours, because we project our Western perspective on a region that thinks profoundly differently. It is a region of religion, of clans and tribes, very often much more important than their nation state. We in America are anxious always for resolutions. If it hasn't happened already, the policy has failed. But in the Middle East, it can take centuries before they're willing to wait for an outcome. When you hear President Erdogan of Turkey talk about something to his Turkish audience about that happened 800 years ago, people understand that the references. We hear anything that happened a year ago is old news. So we're just going to take about 3-4 minutes just to show you how to understand my analysis and where I've been. This is a picture with me with a colonel in Iraq who was my guide. I'll start with this picture because this is incredibly important. If you know that this past May, it's almost a year ago now, Israel had its latest war with Hamas in Gaza, and it was all started because of about 12 houses in dispute between Jewish ownership and Palestinian Arabs who live there. And I went and visited one of the families. This is the head of UNRWA, who I was there with. And just to tell you that very little things can turn into huge things and symbolic things. Turned out in our discussion with this woman, who's one of the 12 families who claims that, you know, that this is their ancestral home, we found out she's not even a refugee. Her family, when it was empty in 1948, moved down the block into the house. And the person from UNRWA even said to us, wow, I can't believe this person is a refugee, and she's one of the people that was, you know, that was used as a basis to start the last Gaza war. This is me in Iraq with the 2-star Peshmerga general for Iran on the Iraqi-Iranian border. I met with our troops in Iraq. This is ISIS. So we're talking about now Israel is having a wave of violence, and many are ISIS sympathizers. I saw ISIS live here. I'm at the front in Iraq with ISIS just below the mountain below. We'll talk about this because when we're talking about the northern war Israel faces, and I visited in the very beginning, I was given access to the tunnels that were 20 stories underground, built a mile, 20 to 24 stories deep, that Hezbollah built and dug to kidnap Israeli soldiers, and they were very sophisticated. I've been on the front lines, literally watching Hamas try to hit Israeli civilians and how Israel tried to respond without hitting Gazan civilians. This is me with Radar Raz. I've been in the PLO. I've recently been in Ramallah. This is with young international lawyers from Philippines and Australia. I've met with the Palestinian negotiating team, and I've seen the good sides of Israeli-Palestinian cooperation. I've been to the Gulf in the Abraham Accords. These are just Palestinian citizens of Israel. Other people call them Israeli Arabs. And just to show you how, I was in a house on the right of reconciliation between Israel and the Palestinians, but yet the needlepoint that was hanging there was not in Israel. If you look over there, there was a one-state solution. And I've seen the Temple Mount confrontations, and I work on both sides of the aisle in Congress. So this is my friend Grace Meng, a Democrat on the Progressive Caucus. This is a conservative senator, Senator Tom Cotton. So I work on both places. So just to give you a baseline. So let's get right into our first major topic, which is Iran. And because right now we are possibly, high likelihood, I would say, re-entering the Iranian nuclear agreement, the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. And I think it's very important that we need to take a step back, and this is something Americans are not good at, to see the context of why we're here now and how we got here. And so it really starts, President Obama, when he came into office in 2009, had a very different idea of what he thought of the Middle East. His goal and his administration's goal, the people he brought in, wanted to balance the playing field between Israel, Iran, Gulf states. He felt it was too imbalanced. America too favored the Gulf states, too favored Israel. He felt that if he got Iran to be respected, they would reciprocate. That if he made a nuclear deal, it would be stabilizing for the Middle East. He did not prioritize that the Middle East was a vital American security concern. And for that matter, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or Israel, was not the essential ally going back, and this is 13 years ago, that many people like me think it is for American national security interests. And interestingly enough, he believed that Iran and Russia were legitimate stakeholders. Remember, Russia had a place. President Obama, a few years after, made a deal with Russia about the chemical weapons. So this Russian invasion now puts it in a different light, but we have to remember what our executive branch thought of Russia in the last 20 years. But I think the best way to think about this, and I think this is where American administrations make mistakes, I follow what Ken Pollack says, who's one of the true Iran experts. And basically what he says is, it's easy to be an expert on Iran. All you have to say is, I don't know, and it depends. I actually heard him somebody using his quote last night, a guy named Michael Doran, who's another expert on Iran. I was watching a briefing that he did. We need to be humble about understanding Iran. It is complex. So what was President Obama and the administration's view before we got to the Iran agreement in 2015? This is President Obama. He says the deal we'll accept is that they end their nuclear program. It's very straightforward. But after the agreement, he said that in the end of the agreement, which would be years like 2029, 30, 31, that Iran would be able to have an unlimited amount of advanced centrifuges, and the breakout time for nuclear enrichment to 90% would be down to 0, which was not exactly what was promised. In 2021, last year, Secretary of State Kissinger said, we should not fool ourselves about this JCPOA. I don't believe the Iran deal with so many escape clauses will do anything other than bring nuclear weapons all over the Middle East. And something I'm going to talk about a little later, and this is important. Iran can't give up its Islamist imperialism. It's a combination of ancient Persian nationalism and Shiite Islamism. And we'll talk about that in understanding negotiating with a partner that thinks that way. So the consensus for a deal in 2015, when President Obama and the administration made it, was that the plutonium reactor in Iraq would be dismantled, the enrichment sites in Fordow and Natanz would be dismantled, the weaponization site. Remember, nuclear weapons are a combination of things. It's either plutonium or the enriched uranium is one part. Another part is compartmentalizing the bomb on the top of a nuclear warhead. That's weaponization. And then there's the means to deliver it, ballistic missiles. And where a lot of the weaponization occurred was in military bases. So we needed unrestricted inspections. That's what everybody said we needed. We got none of it. I know this, and since that time, I was with you, I think, through 2014. I was at that time working with people in Senator Corker's office, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. So I was privy to quite a bit of this information when it was going on. So what are the flaws of that original agreement, which we want to resurrect now? The number one flaw to me was Israel, who was the one directly threatened by a nuclear Iran, was excluded, was promised by the Obama administration to be involved, but the administration went and secretly negotiated with Iran in Oman. Now, why should Israel be concerned if you don't know? This is just one of the many tweets from the supreme leader, the head Ayatollah Khamenei, and this is talking about the final solution, and they want a final solution of Israel, eliminating the Zionist entity. Something else that people don't talk about is, and it was unprecedented, is right from the beginning, we agreed to give the world's largest state sponsor of terror the right to enrich uranium. That doesn't mean they couldn't use nuclear material for peaceful civilian use. Everybody else in the world, other than unless you're a great power like France or China or Russia or America, basically has to import low enriched uranium and send out the waste. We allowed them right from the beginning, and they were totally unrepentant, to enrich uranium, another profound foundational fault. Also, I said to you, where was weaponization occurring? The compartmentalization on top of a ballistic missile to make it small enough, a grapefruit size, so you could have a reaction on the top of a nuclear reaction on top of a warhead. It's at a military site. We did not get access to military sites, and we allowed that for the deal. So we now have a new agreement coming. Now, this is not a Republican-Democrat food fight again. And by the way, there's plenty of polarization about a lot of things. But to give you an idea how contentious this is, the number 2 guy in the team, Richard Nephew, and 2 other deputies quit the Iran nuclear deal over concerns that we, America, that Robert Malley was leading negotiations and who reported to Secretary of State Blinken, were conceding way too much. And if you think that wasn't enough, and you didn't hear about this, happened this week, Dan Shapiro, who is an icon of many Zionist Democrats, he quit the Iranian nuclear team. He's the former US ambassador to Israel. And his job for the State Department was a special envoy on Iran as a liaison to Israel about the nuclear deal. To the Biden administration's credit, which the Obama administration did not do, they have kept them fully informed of what's going on. I'm not sure how much influence Israel has, but they have, to their word, kept them informed. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I published an article in The Hill, and I interviewed this person who was alerted to me by a senior staffer in a Senate office named Gabriel Nerona. Now, Gabriel Nerona was most known in the last year, being fired by right before President Biden took over. It was in January. He was most known for being fired by President Trump because he said that he should resign for his role in January 6th. So this is not somebody who's just a pure partisan. He was at the Iran desk in the State Department, and his friends in state, in National Security Council, in the EU, was so alarmed about what America has been offering and giving away in the current Iranian nuclear negotiations that they allowed him to publish details, which I'm going to share with you now, and which I published in The Hill, to alert the American people about it undermining our national security interests. So as part of the deal, and granted, the deal has not been signed yet, and I'll go over what's holding it up right now. Almost every individual or Iranian entity will be desanctioned that has sanctions on it, even though 100 of them have been sanctioned for terrorism, human rights violations, and weapons of mass destruction activities. And remember, sanctions are not supposed to be stopped on Iran except related to the nuclear work if a deal is completed. Unfortunately, after the 2015 deal, we did not enforce and did not take any new sanctions against the human rights abuses, expansionism, and terrorism. So to give you an idea, this is one of the people who would get off in the New Deal. You know, he's sort of like a cast character of a bad guy. But this is a Google picture I grabbed of him. Basically, the Republican Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is designated as a foreign terrorist entity. This person who led the forces that killed 241 of our soldiers back going all the way to 1983 when they bombed the Marine barracks, he would be taken off sanctions here, as would Ayatollah Khamenei's personal corporations. You say, well, what does he have in his personal corporations? There's something called Sedat, which is worth over $100 billion. Most of the Iranian military Revolutionary Guards, they control much of the Iranian economy and enrich themselves through it. And this is the sticking point on the current deal. Iran wants the Iranian Revolutionary Guards to be removed as a foreign terrorist organization. And supposedly we have offered to take them off. This is the inside word, and I don't know for sure if it's true, if they don't go after Americans in response to the killing of the former head of the Revolutionary Guard, Soleimani. But think about who the Iranian Revolutionary Guards is. They're responsible for killing more than 600 Americans in Iraq. They were directly complicit in the genocide of hundreds of thousands of civilians helping Assad in Syria. They support directly Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and they go way back with the bombing of the Israeli embassy and Jewish center in Argentina. So what are American decisions in dealing with Iran and rejoining this deal? So this is one of the big issues right now, and this is another thing that I've been writing about and working about. And it's interesting enough, Stan with Us actually just sent out something about this as a large thing through the social media. The deal in 2015 said, if there's any change to the deal, Congress must be given 30-day hearing. It's called the Iran Nuclear Review Act, INARA. And the Biden administration has said they don't want to bring it there because there's actually quite a few people, including Democrats, who are very troubled by what's going on. Leading the pack is Senator Menendez, to his great credit, who has been the one really sounding the alarm about this deal. Also, Senator Cardin from Maryland, another Democratic Zionist stalwart, has said he had a private briefing and he still doesn't know what's going on. Here's something that you haven't been told. The administration has not been enforcing sanctions on Iranian oil sales to China as a sweetener, so they'll join the deal. They've not been enforcing Iran's sales of electricity to Iraq, making money. And they haven't told you about that we have helped Iran join UN voting by getting billions of dollars that were released in a frozen account in South Korea. So this new deal is basically a less for less deal. And basically, Secretary of State Blinken basically says it's not so great, but it will slow their nuclear program. So the new deal, if this is exactly what happens, and this is probably pretty close if it does happen, in 2023, the United Nations will end restrictions on missile transfers to Iran. And in 2025, UN will close the Iran nuclear file. So the question really for President Biden during the campaign and up until recently is he promised a longer and stronger agreement. There is zero incentive for Iran once we give them the concessions on sanctions to come back in to negotiate a longer and stronger agreement. So these are the things that will begin expiring in 2024. And there's a long list that will sunset starting in the next couple of years. Everything from unlimited centrifuges to new enrichment plants and heavy water reactors, plutonium will be permitted. They will all do all of this without any international sanctions. In fact, it will be approved by the terms of the JCPOA. The hope was when it was signed that over the years from 2015 to 2028 to 2030, that Iran would moderate. And we know that's not true. So at this point, that the fact that President Biden is going back into the deal, or a new deal, I should say, but based upon the old deal, which is a less for less deal, that this is his now. He can't say this is President Obama's. He can't say this because President Trump removed sanctions, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Concessions, what we've been doing, will never work. Appeasing Iran, this type of regime, will never work. And why is that? And this is incredibly important. And I think this is what American politicians and many foreign affairs people that I speak with don't fully appreciate. Because you need to understand the nature of the regime. This is a fundamentalist revolutionary regime. Its mission is to spread Twelver Shiite Islam throughout the Middle East and throughout the world. It is part of their DNA. Our politicians completely misunderstand. This is Ayatollah Khamenei and Ayatollah Khamenei in the picture there. Nuclear negotiations are premised that we in the world are all alike, and that economic priorities, helping your people, will always help. This is not how this regime works. Economic priorities are very important. In fact, they've been under tremendous stress, which I'll get to in a little bit. However, what drives them his religious ideology, and they will take the economic pain for the greater gain for expanding Shiism throughout the Middle East. And you have to remember who's part of the regime. The current president, Raisi, was known as the Butcher of Baghdad. He had a pivotal role in executing thousands of opposition prisoners going back to 1988, part of what was called the Death Committee. In 2009, he was part of the brutal suppression of the Green Movement. And he is likely, when Ayatollah Khamenei, who's in ill health, dies, he will also be the next Ayatollah, supreme leader Ayatollah. The other choice is the current Ayatollah's son, who's also a human rights abuser. So what are Israel's and American choices on how to deal with Iran? So when we think about Israel, Israel has said that we will preemptively strike Iran when they get to become a threshold nuclear state, as we did in 1981 in the Osirk reactor in Iraq, and in Syria in the North Korean built reactor in 2007 under Prime Minister Olmert. That is known as the Begin Doctrine: preemption, prevent any enemy country from developing atomic weapons. So just to give you an idea why Israel is so concerned about this, this is from the Tehran Times. It shows all the Iranian targets throughout all of Israel that it has in its crosshairs. But preemption may not mean attacking the Natanz or the Fordo enrichment sites. It may, but you also have to think, remember I told you the 3 parts to the nuclear program? It could be the weaponization program that they're going to attack. They may be the best way to stop or slow them down. So what does the Israel Defense Forces, their intelligence, and Mossad think about the US rejoining the Iran agreement? So this is a picture of the departing Mossad chief, Yossi Cohn, and the new chief, David Barnea, and a meeting at that time with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And what the new chief said is that the JCPOA only reinforces a sense of Israeli isolation, and Iran is now able to realize its nuclear vision, and it does this through lies and concealment. Now, it's not everything in the Middle East I told you is 5-dimensional. There's actually a behind-the-scenes fight between the IDF and Mossad. Not that the end results of what they think about Iran are different, but the IDF, military intelligence chief Aron Halevi, and this is in leaked classified information, said that they believe that if this deal comes, it might delay the Iranian program another year, 2 or 3, and we need that time to do a preemptive attack. It's not the same view as Mossad. Now, ultimately, this is a political decision, just like here. Our defense chief and our secretary of state don't make decisions, or the joint chiefs of staff. It's made by, in a democracy, by the head of the political coalition. So it'll be Bennett, Gantz, and Lapid who will make that decision. So to know what Israel's choices are, we need to know where Iran is right now. So David Pollock from the Washington Institute, again, one of the go-to guys about Iran, and back in December, a couple of months ago, said Iran is only weeks away from 90% enrichment, nuclear grade. And it's only a few months away from crude weaponization. And this new deal will guarantee a nuclear threshold state, which almost for sure means if they're capable, Israel will have to take action. So this is a question that you hear, and this is, and I try to be apolitical about this, but this is a question, and I mentioned about Michael Doran before, but this is on a different topic. So the question was, but didn't President Trump's withdrawal from the JCPOA accelerate Iranian nuclear program? And the answer is yes and no. One of the things is that when he did withdraw, the fact that they were able to go so quickly to 90% meant that we really had very weak restrictions on them. And that was his point, the fact that they were able to go to 60%. You realize that 3% is what you need for civilian use. Going from 3 to 20 is the huge step. 20 to 60 is hard, but not as hard as 3 to 20. And going from 60 to 90 is relatively a simpler task of what it is. And Iran probably, if it chose, could probably have enough enriched uranium for a couple of nuclear weapons within months. But Israel, if it believes that it has to strike the enrichment sites, may have to go sooner than later, because we have been talking back in 2015, I was saying there was this Natad site, it's built underground. Well, they've gone more than twice as deep and made it much more fortified. And that makes it, this is David Albright from the Institute for Science and International Security, that Israel, to have to get their advanced centrifuge network, they may have to act sooner than later. And these are open source maps. And so another expert who I won't mention told me that basically there, if you look at where it says like 2 eastern entrances, original entrance 2007, all of these things where there are entrances, all of those places are the vulnerabilities where you could, if you had the right weapon. And Israel does not have the right weapon to go that deep. They're massive ordinances. And even if Israel was given those massive ordinances, it doesn't have the aircraft to deliver them. So that's something the United States could, if it chose to, give Israel as a leverage if they make this deal. That's what some senators are asking the administration, is fighting it. But again, you can see all of these places that Israel, Eastern Auxiliary Portal, and all these places that are constructed where it's reinforced the entries, those are the vulnerabilities for an attack, but it is super deep. And you'll say, what does it look like down there? This is what it looks like. Fortified and many, many stories deep. And you can see, look how little the people are who are there, and look at the size of these ballistic missiles. Again, look at the troops that are there, look at the missiles, look how far back this goes. But the question then comes, is it too late for Israel to strike by itself? If America goes back into a deal here and Israel's on its own, maybe working with the Saudis or the UAE, but basically by itself, can it do it? So are there alternatives to threaten Iran? Well, here's one alternative. It's not discussed. 90% of Iran's oil and gas comes from a little island called Karg Island. And I'll show you where it is. You see that little, I can't point on here, but if you can see it, it's boxed in there. It's a very vulnerable place. Israel could shut down basically their economy if it hit that little island and its facilities. Israel could also hit a port, Bandar el Abbas, where almost all of their container trade goes. And that's very close here near the Straits of Hormuz. You can see it on the top. Another possibility. Something that has been happening is cyber attacks. And basically, if Israel really wanted to cripple Iran, it would not only attack Karg Island, but cyber attack its whole energy infrastructure. And the Israeli secret unit, which is Unit 8200, sorry, its chief, General Schneerson, said that is what would be done. So the next question came, and I have the slide from pre-Ukraine invasion. Is containment an option with a nuclear Iran, mutually assured destruction? We said, well, you know, we were dealing with the Russians. They're rational actors. They didn't want to blow up. We didn't want to blow up. So we kind of were able to do it. Can you do that with a revolutionary regime? Well, now with Putin actually threatening the possible use of tactical, not intercontinental, but tactical nuclear weapons, obviously mutually assured destruction is not as strong as we thought it was during the years of the Cold War. But if it's too late for Israel, could it strike a grand bargain with President Biden, who obviously has some sympathies for Israel's security? Would he put Israel under an American nuclear umbrella? Or would he give it those massive ordinances called MOABs to threaten Iran if it ever broke out in enrichment for its deeply buried nuclear facilities and the aircraft that deliver them? And what happens if there is an agreement, but Iran breaches it? Iran breached its agreement in 2015 a number of times, and we kind of looked the other way. But what was supposed to happen is snapback sanctions, in theory, military actions, or what we did the last time, which was nothing. If there are sanctions, again, what we can't do is not enforce them on the people that purchase or help Iran survive, mainly the Chinese, and buying all of their oil. We cannot give them a pass, and that's called secondary sanctions. We would have to sanction China for buying Iranian fossil fuels. Now, focusing only on Iran's nuclear program is a mistake, because there's so many other nefarious things that they do. They are the world's #1 terrorist rate, exporting it around the world. And they're a profound human rights abuser. They do this all over Tehran and other cities, hanging people, including gays, to make a point. Now, just today, President Biden put some sanctions on ballistic missiles, which is the correct thing to do, of the companies that purchase ballistic missiles in Iran. And there shouldn't be any question about that, because Iran sent ballistic missiles against Americans in Kurdistan, in Erbil, in our facilities there, that we've been attacked by missiles in Al-Tanf in Syria with our troops. I mean, there's been many things we haven't responded to. But the real question is, these Iranian companies, why are we sanctioning them? We should be sanctioning the people who ordered the ballistic missiles. Who is that? The Iranian Revolutionary Guards and the Supreme Leader. So it sounds good on the surface, but it's not getting to the root cause of who's ordering the missiles and buying the missiles. And their expansionism. Remember, Iran basically has Iraq as a vassal, Syria as a vassal, Lebanon as a vassal, parts of Yemen with the Houthis as a vassal, and it has its eyes on Jordan. Iran wants to expand, and it believes it has a right to expand. And that nuclear umbrella, if they don't use it, it allows them to become invulnerable to attacks for all of their other nefarious behaviors. So what should be America's goal? Non-kinetic regime change. And I learned this term at the Kennedy School of Government, which basically means most regime changes are of the people, and they're not violent, interestingly enough. So is regime change warmongering? It's not. It's simply saying, just like we do with the Ukrainian people, who we want them to take control of their lives, we want the Iranian people who've been out in the streets by the hundreds of thousands and are being repressed to be able to have freedom. It's not necessarily they'll be our friends, but it'll be a lot. I'll take my chances with a true free election in Iran and the Iranian people there, and not having the Ayatollahs in charge. And it gets full circle now to those maximum pressure sanctions. And we were told, look, Iran is still marching along. The sanctions weren't working. Well, that's a Western perspective. The sanctions were working. So you'll say, why? Prove it. So this is an Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps leaked document that was hacked out. And this is what the Iranian Revolutionary Guard said about the sanctions, what it's doing to the Iranians. Our society is in a state of explosion. Social discontent has risen in Iran by 300%. The public's trust in President Raisi, so you know this is new because he's a new president, is down. Inflation's out of control, and there are hundreds of civil protests throughout there. If we give sanctions relief with this new JCPA, it means we're abandoning the Iranian people. It means there will be tens of billions of dollars in released funds, unlimited trade throughout the world, unrestrained use of Iran with the banking system, unlimited Iranian exports of oil, and massive foreign investment. Is that good for American national security interests? I certainly know they're not good for its regional neighbors. So I believe America should stand with the Iranian people. This is a picture back in November of tens of thousands of people brutally suppressed by the Iranian regime protesting. Which brings us in a segue to Ukraine. So what's Ukraine's lesson for Israel? Rely only on yourself. Nobody's coming to your defense. So let's contrast this. How do we bring this together? The American response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine versus how we're approaching Iranian nuclear negotiations. And I wrote a piece on this for The Hill. If anybody wants to go back and look, I'll be happy to send you the link. So there's a double standard. Our media, and me and you, are outraged by what the war crimes Putin is doing. Yet our journalists have remained silent on legitimizing the Iranian regime. If we go back to this deal, nobody's highlighting that this human rights abuser and exporter of terrorism, we're making, that is as bad as Putin of what they've done. It's just that it hasn't gotten the coverage day in and day out every night, on television, of what the Iranians do to people of the Middle East. And another thing our journalists haven't told you about is how much money, billions upon billions upon billions of dollars Russia will receive in this JCPOA. As part of the deal, Russia's in charge of doing all types of nuclear work for them. And it's going to be amazing amount of free resources for Russia, the country we're trying to put sanctions on. It is totally hypocritical. Now, the foreign minister of Russia said he's not going to derail this agreement. By the way, we've outsourced the negotiations. The Iranians, and this is ludicrous, as a superpower in the world, have not allowed us in the room to negotiate on this new deal. We have had the Russians negotiating for us before Ukraine and after the Ukraine invasion. And basically, they want to make sure that they're going to be able to get all the advantages of the trade from the original JCPOA. And just to remind you, this is just the list of our State Department since 1984 about Iran being a State Department sponsor of terror, everything from killing dissidents in Europe to hiding Al-Qaeda Sunnis that they've hidden and living in Iran, to the human rights abuses of the Sunnis. You can just go on and on and on about it. And here's the real hypocrisy with Ukraine, Russia, America, the JCPOA. Putin has immunity because he has nuclear weapons. Ukraine has no immunity. It was the third largest country as far as nuclear weapons, and was promised by the Bucharest, I believe, a memorandum that nobody can invade them if we give up our nuclear weapons back in 1994. But what are we doing with this JCPOA? We are putting weapons of mass destruction in the hands of the Revolutionary Guards and the Ayatollah in a short period of time. If you listen to what President says, he says, Iran will not have nuclear weapons on my watch. His watch is another 2, 3 to 7 years. That may be true. What we were promised won't be on anybody's watch. We wouldn't tolerate it unless there was regime change there. And so what Ord Kittry from a think tank that I work with says, lifting sanctions, and this, by the way, is what happened. So it's not just sanctions on nuclear-related things. What happened in 2015 was we did not enforce human rights sanctions, not put new sanctions on terrorism as we were promised. He says, lifting sanctions on Iranian human rights abuses and terrorist sponsors would send a dangerous message of impunity to Putin and his henchmen at a time when they are committing war crimes in Ukraine. The decision is contrary to American values, would wrongly abandon the Islamic Republic's many victims, and would also weaken deterrence against future abuses in Iran. And I think that really sums it up. So the lesson of Ukraine for the United States: when dictators talk, believe them. You know, very often we heard that the Ayatollah was going to obliterate Israel. We heard that a moderate Iranian president says Israel's a one-bomb state. Oh, it's just rhetoric. When you have authoritarians, dictators of all stripes, whether they're communists or whether they are religious ideologues, they mean what they say. And you must not only be strong, but they must believe that you're willing to use force. Isolationism, which is what we've done too much in the Middle East, and appeasement, lead to expansionism and increase the chance of war. You think about it, the West, when Putin took Georgia, Crimea, Eastern Ukraine, there's been no consequences. It wasn't until he did this adventure that we really start speaking up. The world didn't say anything when he invaded Cyprus 45 years ago. And how Russia, just want to throw one little flavor in here. Russia, which has, and I'll mention this in just a moment, has its new naval and air bases in Syria. It looks at the Middle East as one military theater, going all the way from the Black Sea, from Crimea, all the way through Turkey, all the way through Syria to Israel. And that is its viewpoint. We break these things up. If you look at the State Department, each area has a region. And so this is how it looks at it. Russia, if things go south, has been thought of, some strategists believe, that they could start a Middle East conflict just to divert attention away from Ukraine. 5-dimensional chess here, which brings us, and I'll get Russia in part of this also, to Iran on Israel's northern border. So people say, will there be a third Lebanon war? No, there would be a first Iranian-Israel northern war. If you look at that red line, that's 105 miles from Lebanon through Syria down to the edge of Jordan and Israel. That is where the Iranian Revolutionary Guards is, where Iran is entrenched, where Iran is in control. This and Israel striking in these places and much farther north in weapons transfers is called the war between the wars, until the inevitable, not if, just when the next northern war occurs. And people talk about, well, will Hezbollah do this or that? You need to know something called guardianship of the jurist, which means that the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei now, and it could be Ayatollah Raisi after that, is in charge of all the world Shiites. So Nasrallah follows the orders of whatever the Iranians say. It's just like a division of the Revolutionary Guards. Hezbollah is in these its locations on just north of Israel. You can see just to the west of the Hula Valley and north of the Galilee, and also in the Bekaa Valley. And you can see the range of their missiles. There is no place Hezbollah missiles from almost anywhere in Lebanon can hit in Israel. The question is how accurately. So how many missiles does Hezbollah have? Basically, probably 150,000 missiles. By the way, since 2006, the second Lebanon war, UNIFIL, the UN body that was supposed to stop missile transfers, has stopped precisely 0. And just to give you an idea, this is an organization definitely worth looking up. It's a think tank that I work with called ALMA. They are the go-to think tank about Israel's north. So when senators, Democrat or Republican, come to Israel, they meet with Sarit Zahavi, Lieutenant Colonel of Military Intelligence, my friend and colleague who I write with, and she knows all the ins and outs of what's there. But there's basically several hundred advanced precision-guided missiles. That is the one that could hit Azareli Towers, could hit the Dimona nuclear plant. And this is a sophisticated army. This is not a terrorist army. I never pronounced this right, the Yahank are land to sea missiles that actually hit an Israeli ship. This is an incredibly advanced, powerful, conventional army paid for by Iran and will be supplemented by the JCPOA. Now, this is our general in CENTCOM who's in charge there. And just to give you an idea, in talking about all of Iran's missile abilities, from Iran, what they have in Iraq, what they have from the Houthis, what they have in Lebanon, they have the ability to overwhelm. They can effectively strike everywhere in the Middle East. Their strategic capacity is now enormous. And as US naval intelligence says, the difference between Iran's reach just 5 years ago is unbelievable. The game changer that can turn this into the first Northern Israel-Iran war is precision-guided missiles. When they reach a threshold of those, that's Israel's red line. And if they get enough kits to turn conventional missiles into precision-guided ones, that's when Israel may have to preemptively strike. This is how they go. If you see on the right, you can see Tehran, and they transfer them through Iraq, which is its vassal. Nothing has stopped the Iranian-controlled Iraqi militias. And there's 2 towns there. If you see closely, Al-Tanf and Al-Bukamal. Al-Tanf is where our American soldiers are that were struck by missiles by Iran that were fortunately warned by Israeli intelligence. And Al-Bukamal is a place Israel continually hits. And you can see it blown up here. And that's where the game-changing weapons are. And it's not just missiles. Iran and Hezbollah are in the drone business. And recently, Hezbollah has offered to sell the drones to every bad actor in the Middle East, as long as they were against Israel. And this is one of the drone bases called T4, a before and after picture after Israel hit it. So why does, and this gets right back to Ukraine. So why does Russia, first of all, allow Israel to strike in Syria? Russia got what it wanted in the Syrian war. What it did, it became the go-to address. It's the power player in the Middle East. It got 2 bases. It got a base in Tartus, a seaport, and Kenemim, an airfield, super advanced in a place called Latakia province. And that Iran's activities are bugging it and could destabilize Syria and destabilize what it has gained there. So they let Israel hit. but will it continue to hit? So in Israel, here's the vote voted against Russia in condemning the invasion. How hard is Russia going to push back? This is Russia. Russia controls S-400 and S-300 missile systems throughout the country. It would be profoundly dangerous for Israel if it could not coordinate with Russia in stopping Iranian transfers of missiles to Syria and Lebanon. That would mean Israel would have to strike Russian anti-missile systems. You can imagine the regional conflagration that could occur. This is Israel, by the way, hitting in the Beirut port, places that it hit. By the way, the next regional war between Israel and Hezbollah with Iran here could be over natural gas. That's a big fight. So you have lots of fights. And again, the five-dimensional chess. Israel works with Cyprus, Italy, Greece. The Turks want to be involved. And so does Hezbollah to make some money. And so this is a real point of contention. And by the way, we talk about, Hamas using human shields. Hamas shoots at Israeli civilians, and then they use their civilians as human shields. Hezbollah, if there is a northern war, will be worse. You can look here at where a weapons depot is. This is all from Alma, the think tank that I work with, right next to a school, how they purposely place it. This is just a particular school system. This is 6 school compounds where known launches and weapon storage sites are right next to schools. And you could even know the guy who's in charge of it. And you can see here, you have weapons and a gas company. So you can imagine what would occur, the blast that would occur if Israel hits that weapons storage area. So that's the Middle East. We will get back to it in a second. I'm going to talk about the Abraham Accords. But I want to just take a little detour. We're getting to the last quarter of our lecture at this point. I want to talk about anti-Semitism. And I want to talk about it from the right, from the left, and from Islam. New surveys from many major mainstream Jewish organizations show an incredible number of Jewish students on college campuses hide their identity or hide that they have support of Israel because of intimidation, including grade intimidation. 90% of Jews in America, overall, not just college kids, say anti-Semitism is a problem. But of all Americans, any religion, 80% consider anti-Zionism to be anti-Semitism, which is correct. So you may have seen some of this, but this is what your reference is when you talk to friends to how do you differentiate legitimate criticism of Israel, and Israelis do it all the time, from things that go into anti-Semitism. If you demonize Israel, you call Israel Nazis, that is anti-Semitism. If you have a standard for Israel that you don't have for other countries, that's anti-Semitism. The Human Rights Watch, which is about Israeli apartheid, the #1 human rights abuser in the world is Israel. Not China's mass detention of the Uyghurs and Muslims, not Taliban attacks on women, not massacres of the Tigray region. You go on and on of what they didn't do. Israel's the number. That's a double standard. That is anti-Semitism. The UN, by definition, is anti-Semitism in the Human Rights Council. And if you delegitimize Israel, that the Jewish people, the only people in the world who don't have a right to self-determination and a right to exist as their own state, that's anti-Semitism. That is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition. That is our State Department definition. Even the UN Secretary General says he likes that definition. You demonize Israel, you have double standards, you delegitimize. That is anti-Semitism. That's when it crosses the line. And that leads into the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, the most dangerous movement beyond kinetic military movements to destroy Israel in the 21st century. So what is BDS? It's the 21st century form of 20th century anti-Semitism. In the 20th century, you killed the collective Jew. The collective Jew today is Israel. And the goal of BDS, they say we're a peaceful organization. They are not a peaceful organization. You just have to listen to their co-founder, who does not believe in a Jewish state, and he opposes a Jewish state in any part of Palestine. Good riddance to the two-state solution, and he's in favor of violence. So why does this resonate so much with our college students? It's cool to be anti-Israel. By the way, as recently as 3 weeks ago, I spoke in Yale about this. And, you know, I was fortunate. The audience was mainly international, including somebody from Iran was there. This was in the graduate school. But our college kids are not open-minded. Facts are irrelevant. Israel is post-colonialist, it's imperialist, it's racist, it was born in sin. And they have tied in the intersectional movement that Palestinians are equal to people of color, a persecuted minority. My organization, Stand With Us, one of the things we are now doing, and if it's not on your radar now, get it on your radar because it's coming to all communities sooner than later, but it's all out there, is anti-Zionism is in your middle schools and high schools, and we are working on it. And let us be a help for you for that. Contact me and I'll put you in touch with people. So it's not just in colleges, it's not just in high schools, it's now in middle schools. And they're changing curriculum that is anti-Zionist and moving into anti-Semitism based on the definition I gave you. And they all play the underdog phenomenon. Nowadays, whoever is considered the victim, whoever is the David, the other person is the Goliath, they are automatically in the wrong. So what I did at Yale 3 weeks ago is I say to them, raise your hands if you're in favor of women's rights. And they raise their hands. And I say, in favor of freedom of the press and religious tolerance and gay rights and freedom of speech. Yes, 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 everybody raise their hands. So I say, well, then you're in favor of Israel, because it's the only country there that has every one of those things. Not a perfect country. My country, America, is not a perfect country, but pretty amazing considering the challenges it has. And I want to segue right now into just the malicious charge of apartheid that it started most recently with Amnesty International and was also of Human Rights Watch. So this is last week, the Amnesty International US director, and this is what he said. We're opposed to the state of Israel as a Jewish state, and we want an absolute right of return. And he spoke, this is at the Women's National Democratic Club. It is not affiliated with the Democratic Party. And he laid his cards on the table. I appreciate the honesty. And turning Israel into an apartheid state makes it illegitimate in the world's eyes. So what is apartheid? Let's remember this. It was horrific. Prohibition of marriage between the races, prohibition of sex between the races, prohibition of blacks from skilled work, prohibiting blacks from voting, prohibiting blacks from striking. What does any of that have to do with Israel? So the International Red Cross, this is the delegate from Israel and the Palestinian Authority, said there's no apartheid here. This isn't a regime here that is based on the superiority of one race over another. There's no disenfranchisement of basic human rights on so-called racial inferiority. The former head of Human Rights Watch took to pen about 10 years ago, talking about what human rights has become, saying they basically have turned Israel into a pariah state. It is not about Human Rights Watch. It is about an advocacy group to destroy the state of Israel. Mansour Abbas, the head of the Arab Party, the Islamist Arab Party in Israel, says that Israel is not an apartheid state. Michael Ignatieff from Harvard says labeling Israel as an apartheid state is just a deliberate attempt to undermine the legitimacy of the Jewish state itself. Palestinian citizens of Israel have free elections. They vote in the elections. They're part of the government. The Israeli Arabs are in the Supreme Court. There is an independent judiciary. Any Palestinian citizen of Israel, an Israeli Arab, can go to the Supreme Court. And incitement to racism is a criminal offense in Israel. So this year, Israel appoints Palestinian citizen of Israel, Khalid Kaboub, to the Supreme Court. And the current head of the Islamist Party as part of the coalition with Bennett and Gaz and Lapid is Mansour Abbas. But who is an apartheid state? This is the Palestinian Authority president, who's also the head of Fatah, who's also the head of the PLO. He would not have a single Israeli, and Israeli and Jew are interchangeable in the Middle East, on Palestinian land. And to him, Palestinian land should be from the river to the sea. So the fundamental reason this conflict has not been solved is that most Israelis have or had viewed this as a conflict between two national movements, which should lead, as many American politicians of both parties said, to two states for two peoples. Except that the Palestinians, and I was most recently in Ramallah just a couple of months ago talking to Fatah, they don't believe Israel is a legitimate national movement. They believe that Judaism is a religion and not legitimate and not a national movement. So when I said to them, what happens if you're an atheist and you're a Zionist, how does that work out? There wasn't much of an answer. You know, being religious Jewish is just one component of being a Jew. There's the national dimension, the civilizational dimension, traditional dimension, the cultural dimension. So anybody who says it's just a religion is incorrect. And why this is a picture, by the way, from the Fatah youth movement from a couple of months ago. This conflict keeps going on because of the right of return, the unconditional right of return of descendants of Palestinian refugees, which they are the only descendants of refugees who claim that or are given that by the UN. Which will get us to our final topic, Israel's normalization with the Arab world, which was a tectonic shift. This is me down in Abu Dhabi, and I was in Bahrain and Dubai. So a friend of mine, Ambassador Aaron David Miller, said, I was wrong. I never thought there would be normalization until the Israeli-Palestinian dispute. Basically, we and all the American experts were wrong. Well, one of the experts wrong, and even after and during and everywhere along the way did to stop it was Secretary of State Kerry, because right before this happened, said there will be no separate peace. No, no, no. He was emphatic about it. The other people were emphatic about it was the Palestinian Authority. Normalization, Israel with the Arab world, the Sunni Arab world, should be a wake-up call for the Palestinians. They need to understand they are not a priority in the Arab world. And normalization would be great for the Palestinians, but it would be the worst thing for the corrupt Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. So is normalization only about Iran? Well, the naysayers said it's only transactional when this occurred. And I will tell you, almost every deal is transactional. It's an expectation of mutual benefit. One exception was Harry Truman in 1948, where he recognized Israel against his State Department. It was not transactional. He did it on a value-based foreign policy. So why are Muslim countries normalizing? Iran is a big part. They want to be on the side of, with America withdrawing from the Middle East, they want to be on the side of Israel. And the economics Israel brings allows them to move away from fossil fuel-based economies. So just today, I just added this slide. This is the head General Salami, who says, we will not tolerate the Abraham Accords. They will do everything they can to impede them. But they're moving ahead. So this is this month. You see Sisi and MBK from the United Arab Emirates and Bennett all together in Sharm el-Sheikh. And even maybe more important, all the foreign ministers are there, including, to a credit, Secretary of State Blinken came in the Negev. They all came to Israel to do this. The Saudis are the big question. And I actually talk with one of the Saudi people in the embassy, and I try to move them. But can this conservative Wahhabi monarchy make this step at this time? They are certainly talking to Israel a lot about security. But the real normalization that needs to occur, it's got to occur to the two old partners, to Jordan and to Egypt. Egypt is finally moving with Sisi to decrease and to make some more people-to-people interactions. I wrote a piece with an Egyptian professor last year about the people-to-people interactions that are needed. That's what's happening in the Abraham Accords, but they're not happening between the Egyptian people and the Israeli people, or the Jordanian people and the Israeli people. And a lot has to do with the amount of anti-Israel, anti-Jewish rhetoric throughout Jordan and Egypt. And here this week, just to show you that King Abdullah may be putting on something different, a different clothes here. He is with President Herzog, trying to tamp down some tensions before we enter the month of Ramadan, where violence has occurred in the past. But normalization must be nurtured. and it is good for America's interests. It's good for regional stability. I will tell you, the ranking member of the Foreign Relations Committee has told me that the administration has not been anxious to move ahead here because it is considered a Trump initiative. And I would love for them to move past the fact that it came under Trump's administration, because it's good for America. I don't care if it's Democratic or Republican, that this initiative should be something embraced. And the Saudis won't get in bed here unless America is helpful. And if America is prioritizing Iran and the JCPOA, then Saudi Arabia is not anxious to join the Abraham Accords. And if anybody would like to contact me, this is my personal email address. Please write any questions to me that you don't have answered, or anything you don't want to ask. And please sign up for my website. I have a piece in the Jerusalem Report. I have a piece in the Jerusalem Post today. I have a piece on Turkey today. I have a piece about Ukraine, the Jerusalem Report, and I'd be happy to send them to you. You can go to MEPINanalysis.org. And now I'm happy to answer any questions.
Dr. Mandel, thank you so much. This is Julie Ketover speaking. I am a vice president on the JCRC. I'm overwhelmed by the information. I can understand your comment earlier about your mother not wanting to read some of your pieces due to some depression. And this is timely, important, real-time information that we're getting from you. So I, for one, am extremely appreciative. We have a lot of questions, some of which we will likely not get to, but I'm going to ask a few here and see if you can comment. Thank you again for that fulsome speech and talk around so many timely topics. So the arguments, this was asked by immediate past President Jeff Shackett. The arguments against returning to the deal are well and widely known. So why would the Biden team ignore them? Are they naive, indifferent, false with their statements about Israel's security? And as I add on to that, how come the P5+1 have remained in the deal?
Okay, so as far as what I think the Biden administration would like to do is, for lack of a better word, kick the can down the road. And because in returning to this deal, they will have some restrictions. The problem is there are not enough restrictions and the concessions are too much. And so what Secretary of State Blinken says, and what President Biden has said, is that this is the best that we can get. And maybe that's, and we should take it because it's not great, but it's better than not having it where they'll race to a nuclear material and force Israel's hand to go in there. That may be true. So I'm gonna fess up here about something. So I was asked in 2017, 18, 19, should America withdraw from the JCPOA? And after everything you heard me say, you would have said, sure, you hated the deal. And that's true, I did. I thought it was a terrible deal. I was there when it was happening. I said, no. I said, here's what you should do. Go back to what President Obama actually promised us, which he didn't deliver on, which was the nuclear deal, yes, and it wasn't great, but it did have restrictions. But the president promised we would continue to have sanctions, unremitting sanctions on their human rights and their terrorism, and they didn't. And the reason they didn't was because the Iranians said, you put any sanctions us or enforce sanctions, we consider all sanctions to be against the nuclear deal, and they'll walk away. And there were so many people invested in the deal as part of President Obama's foreign policy legacy that they closed their eyes to Iran's behavior. So this is a different situation going back. But after everything I said, and I have to be totally truthful, I said, don't leave that deal, but do put sanctions on, because then if Iran moved out of the deal, it would be on them and we would have had better international support. They still would have had enough reason to stay in, but we gave them way too loose of a rope and they ran with it.
Thank you. I've been told we don't have a ton of time for many more, and you've been speaking for a long time. So I'll just ask you, no, it's wonderful. It's incredibly educational and timely information for all of us. So turning to a different issue, we talked about BDS. I'm particularly interested in that as I have a daughter about to be going to college in a couple of years. You talked a little bit about tactics to thwart some of the anti-Israel, anti-Zionist rhetoric on campus. What additional advice could you offer to high school students, even to your point, middle school students, college students, and their families to help navigate any anti-Israel hostility they encounter?
They need to be associated with an organization that's going to be helpful to them and to protect them, because unfortunately, too many college administrators have looked the other way. Other things that would be said to other minority groups would, hit the front page of the student newspaper. There's rationalizations when they occur against Jewish students. I can tell you just my personal experience of what middle schoolers, high schoolers, and college students, and I'm actually speaking in another week to a podcast to high schoolers on treaties. So I do, I enjoy talking to young people who are still open-minded and not biased already. If you join an organization like Stand With Us, and then you get their help, and they educate you, and they explain how to deal with situations, that is the best thing. But I'll tell you a negative, what I tell people when I go to some campuses, when they'll tell me, I believe if I could just talk one-on-one to somebody who's pro-BDS, I'll be able to convince them of the merits of my argument. Not exactly what college students say, but basically that's the point. And I have to tell you, 99 out of 100 times, I tell them, don't even waste your time unless there's somebody within earshot who is open-minded, if it's a group. But if it's one-on-one, people's minds are closed, not just kids, adults. It's a very scary world we live in from that perspective. So the key here is find your organization. JCRC is going to have something, AJC. I like my organization, Stand With Us. There's many groups that could be helpful here. And just because a group sounds like it has a good name, it's going to be pro-Israel. Jewish Voice for Peace is not pro-Israel, there are groups to stay away. You need to do a little work that's there. It's hard, but it's worth the effort, because we should be so proud, just like every other minority in this country should be proud to be Americans and be proud for who and what we are. We offer so much, and we're so assimilated, but we also have our pride, and there's no reason to hide that on college. That's someplace where you grow in your identity. To hide it is a tragedy.
Thank you. I'm going to do one more unless Sabrina gives me permission to do another, but I think this might have to be the last one. I really found it moving and informative, the way you drew the comparison between the coverage of Iran versus the coverage of Putin and Ukraine, and just how biased the American media is, or the global media is, as it relates to Israel. So those of us, and I think this includes everybody on this call, who care about and support Israel and are dismayed at the longstanding bias against Israel that we witness and hear about every day in mainstream media, what can we do to counter the bias? And do you recommend any particular sources, in addition to your own website, of course, for people to consult to get a less biased and maybe even pro-Israel picture of Israeli news and issues?
It's not just Israeli news, it's all news. When you open up the New York Times, it is opinion journalism. You listen to NPR, you listen to Fox News, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. There is, when I was a young person and I opened up the Times, I felt confident I was getting reporters who were not advocating or for a point of view or editorializing. So it's hard. And then we all go to our echo chambers because it's uncomfortable to go to some places that are not. I'll give you a couple of places that I go. So, I just don't want to just talk in generalities. For Americans, RealClearWorld, they compile articles every single day in the world, from conservative to liberal. It's a very good source. From a synopsis that comes out now twice a week called the Daily Alert from the Conference of Presidents of Major Jewish Organizations. If you think, you do dailyalert.org. They have little synopsi of important stories, and then you could click on. That is good. Listen, if you want to read what I, in Israel, so I write for the Jerusalem Post, I think it's excellent. You have, if you want to go to the right, you have Israel Hayom. If you want to go a little more center left, you have Times of Israel. Haaretz is a full-time Israel critic, but that just shows you the vitality of their democracy. And that's, America has, national interest in the nation. I mean, and that's good. But you have to just, the first thing to do is realize news today is opinion. And once you realize that, then you realize you have more work to do. And too many people will just go to places that are comfortable or listen to people. And then you get shut out by friends and family if you don't exactly have their opinions. Don't give up your ideals, audience, be open-minded, willing to change your mind. There's a reason I go and speak with Fatah and the PLO and this. I'm always looking for something, although even if I get punched in the nose, so to speak, 20 times in a row, I'll go back for a 21st time, looking for something. I love Israel, but boy, it can infuriate me, sometimes, as my country does. But just like America, Israel is an amazing experiment in democracy that we should be proud of, both as Americans and Jews. And as an American who speaks to Congress about American national security interests, Israel is incredibly important to our national security interests. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate your beautiful words, your background, your experience, in-depth, broad experience, and commentary. So Alan, I'm going to kick it to you to close out this really informative presentation. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks, Julie. Wow, that was what a fantastic and educational presentation. It's somewhat alarming, but certainly informative. Hi, my name's Alan Moldoff, and I'm a Vice President of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Southern New Jersey and a co-chair of the Israel Advocacy Initiative. I'd like to thank all of you, and especially Dr. Mandel, for joining us. It is our hope that you will leave this program with a greater sense of empowerment and, dare I say, responsibility for all of us to serve as pro-Israel ambassadors and advocates in our community. I encourage all of you to become involved in the work of our local JCRC, and we look forward to continuing this conversation at other important upcoming community events. Finally, we'd like to thank tonight's generous sponsors, David and Karen Bross, for helping to make this event possible. Our communities are lucky to have such dedicated professionals and lay leaders to ensure we all stay up to date on the latest news and happenings in Israel. Thank you. Thank you again, Dr. Mandel. And all of you, please have a nice evening. Thank you.